to a philosophy of action. Today I want to talk about what causes demographic collapse. Specifically, why developed nations almost universally experience massive drops in birth rates once they become developed. Two factors are very strongly correlated with demographic collapse: economic development and women's rights. Although these factors have their own ways of reducing birth rates, I think both are driven by the same underlying cultural force that ultimately leads to demographic collapse, irrespectively of these factors. That is, a mix of Enlightenment thinking, individualism, and materialism, specifically the Western variant. My evidence for this, in the most basic sense, is the nation of Israel. Israel both has women's rights and economic development, yet does not have a significantly low birth rate. In fact, it has a decently high birth rate of 2.8, and depending on which community you are in, it could even have a birth rate of around 7. This means that being a developed economy with women's rights is not in fact always leading to a reduction in birth rate, although Israel is also the only Western nation that has a positive birth rate right now. As Western societies modernized through industrialization, urbanization, and free market economics, they began to shift how they understood human beings. People were no longer primarily seen as members of clans, families, religious communities, or extended social networks. Instead, humans increasingly became seen as individual units, each with their equal moral worth and equal economic potential. This shift had enormous benefits. When people are viewed primarily as interchangeable individuals, discrimination becomes harder to justify. Racism and sexism become indefensible when everyone is seen as equally capable of participating in economic production, at least morally speaking. In other words, their identity as a member of a clan, family, religious community, etc. no longer hinders their ability to participate in economic society. This is one of the structural reasons civil rights and women's rights were able to advance so dramatically and so quickly in industrial societies. Historically, many arguments for women's equality were explicitly economic. Women could work in factories, women could produce value, women could contribute to growth. As societies became more focused on production and wealth generation, distinctions based on sex, race, or background mattered less and less. What mattered was output. And as this economic focus intensified, societies became more egalitarian, not because egalitarianism created wealth, but because wealth-focused societies naturally flatten differences that don't affect productivity, which of course does actually create wealth. But this same transformation came at a cost. When a culture increasingly values people in terms of economic output, it eventually starts valuing people almost only in terms of economic output. Something vital is lost. Humans stop being understood as rational beings, as mothers, fathers, caretakers, elders, or links in an interchangeable chain. Instead, they become interchangeable units of labor and consumption. This creates a profound incentive problem. Humans are social animals. We seek meaning, fulfillment, and social status. And in a society where economic output becomes the dominant source of status, people will naturally orient their lives around maximizing their economic value and career. The result is that motherhood and fatherhood, especially motherhood, lose social value. Becoming a mother is time-intensive, physically demanding, emotionally consuming, and economically costly, far more so even depending on the legal structure of your country, to being a father. In a culture where productivity defines worth, motherhood, therefore, becomes a liability to your career and to your value as a human being. Over time, homemaking, child-rearing, and family-centered lives begin to be seen as failures or setbacks. Women who prioritize family are subtly or openly discouraged. Having children becomes something to delay, minimize, or avoid altogether in order to protect one's economic trajectory. Think about teenage moms, women who have children around 18, 17. Historically, that would be considered a great honor or a great contribution to society. But in the modern day, such people are ridiculed as being failures or as having their future taken away from them. This, I believe, is a core driver of modern demographic collapse. Now compare this to societies that don't face this same problem. Early Rome, for example, or modern day Israel. These societies are not anti-economic or anti-development, but they are not purely economic in how they understand human purpose. In Israel, national identity, historical continuity, and collective survival still matters deeply to the people. Motherhood is socially honored. Children are not seen merely as private lifestyle choices, but as contributors to something larger than the individual, to reclaiming God's given land. My conclusion is this. If you examine societies across history, you'll find a clear pattern. When a culture focuses more on wealth creation, production, and the personal experience of life as the primary thing, the main thing that is important about a person or about their life, they stop having children. The demographics start getting worse and worse over time. Whilst cultures that preserve non-personal, non-economic, and non-material sources of meaning once focus on family, continuity, identity, and a society beyond the self, they sustain themselves. Demographic collapse is not a mystery. It is the logical outcome of a civilization that forgets why it exists beyond producing wealth. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.